comes to news, what role does social media play in terms of amplification or the customer journey to get people to those sites?
Yeah, well, I think so with social media, the biggest story really is Facebook, and I sometimes feel a little weird talking about that because it seems a little bit too much I'm leaning on a brand, but that is what we see every time we look at the data. So overall, if we just ask people about the different social media sites where they could get news, we just did that poll, I think, a couple months ago. So 2/3 of US adults, this is not anyone under 18, 2/3 of adults get news on social media. Only 20% get news there often, but still that's a pretty sizable portion of the audience. Obviously this is higher for legacy news, for radio or something, it's 90 plus or something. But it's still a pretty sizable portion of the audience for something that still feels kind of weird and ephemeral and kind of hard to nail down. And so the story there, again, is very much Facebook. So this is our bubble chart. People love the bubble chart. So the dotted line is the percent of Americans who use the site, and then the filled in circle is the percent of Americans who get news on the site. So you can see from Facebook, not only do 2 in 3 Americans use Facebook, but almost half of Americans get news there, which is, a pretty crazy portion of people for something that's kind of still pretty chaotic. We did see a little bit more pickup last year on YouTube. That kind of goes up and down. I think when we studied it in the 2012 election, there was a little bit more people were interested in YouTube. 2014, it was kind of down, and now last year there was, we see a lot of YouTube-only news presences like the Young Turks, and there's kind of a few people that have made their brands as vloggers, essentially. So we saw some pickup for YouTube, but again, 45% of Americans getting their news on Facebook, only 18 on YouTube. That's number 2. So again, all those kind of filled in bubbles total up to 2/3, but it's that kind of ocean metaphor. It's a little bit on YouTube and a little bit on Reddit and a little bit on Snapchat and a little bit on Twitter. And these are all very different audiences. The Reddit audience is very young and male and liberal, and the Instagram audience is more female and a little more conservative. So it's all a piece of the audience. Each of these circles represents kind of a particular piece of the audience. And so obviously that's a different model than traditional TV where you just one spot and it kind of hits everybody. But obviously the thing with social media, of course, too, is that it's, again, I use that kind of shallow word, which is a little judgmental. I don't mean to be judgmental, but we kind of ask people in a number of ways, you get news on social media, but what is it like getting news on social media? And we asked people at one point, is it the most important way you get news or just kind of an important way you get news? And very few people said it's the most important. So it's not really their dominant news source. We also see here, we did a study where we kind of looked at how, if you got to an article, how did you get to an article? And do you remember the source of the article? So if they got there from you get a New York Times breaking news alert, I think I just saw one about Puerto Rico or something. So if you get there, almost everyone remembers the source, 78%. But if you got there from social media, only about half of people remember where you actually got that news. So you might remember that, I have this piece of information about shipping regulations for Puerto Rico. But you wouldn't remember that you got it from BuzzFeed. And if you don't remember where you got it from, you can kind of draw your own conclusions about whether or not you'd remember an advertiser or somebody who was mentioned in the article.
Right.
So again, it's this very high level of kind of constant engagement, but not necessarily very deep. We also see a lot of people, we kind of ask people like, you can comment, you can share, you can interact with reporters, you can do all these amazing things. And it's kind of constantly about 20% of people do that thing. There's a lot of people who are just reading or lurking. If you're on the internet, you might call it. So there are these possibilities for engagement that you didn't necessarily have at a newspaper or a TV station, but not a ton of people are taking advantage of it. It's a lot of people scrolling through and clicking on a link and reading it for a while and then going back.